I'm going to introduce two keynote speakers to you. The first one being Dr. Rachid Hourizi, director of an Institute of Coding in the University of Bath. So Rachid has been in this position since the IOC's launch in 2018. And the IOC is a successful national collaboration between 300 employers and 35 universities. And the aim is to transform higher education. So we're really looking this afternoon at the cyber skills perspective. And this, as we found out this morning, is now becoming extremely important. So the IOC at the moment has enrolled 900,000 diverse learners to date. So, I mean, that's pretty amazing, isn't it, if you think about it? So prior to this role, Rachid worked for 10 years in the financial markets as a commodity trader and is now director of the IOC. So Rachid, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me at the back? Perfect. Thank you. I'd like to say that I don't usually say that I'm trying to transform higher education inside a university. So if you could have that as an implicit aim rather than an explicit statement from me, that would be great. I'd also like to point out that when I reached the slide that says government policy, when I left the house this morning in Bristol, that was a really good slide and I was fully behind it. Somewhere on the road, that slide became a little redundant, but we'll work around that. So I really want to talk about three things, if I may. I'd like to talk about skill shortages. I am not a cyber specialist. I'm a computer scientist and more recently a digital skills specialist. I do want to talk a little bit about government policy. I think it's fair to say that what I really want to talk about is gathering momentum behind a new way of delivering advanced education. I believe that will continue to be supported by the new government this evening, as it was by the old government this morning, but we'll have to see. Even without government backing, this is a shift that's ongoing. And then I want to talk about, with any paradigm shift, the idea that some challenges remain. So it's not true that this policy will solve all problems any more than it's true that the last one solved all problems. Are there any questions at this stage? I would also say that I prefer these talks to be a little bit interactive. So if you have a question or would like to discuss, I think we're leaving time at the end for formal questions. But if what I say makes no sense or you violently disagree, would you raise a hand before shouting at me? Is that all right? Thank you. So the wider digital skills gap. We have an issue, certainly in Britain, probably internationally, that we are order of magnitude off in the number of people that we produce with digital skills. So you can pretty much pick your number for the need. The one that we use is the Shadbolt review published in 2017, looking at data from 2016, which suggested that we had a need for approximately 400,000 additional people with advanced skills in the country. That was before a pandemic during which digital skills adoption leapt, by Amazon's reckoning, leapt forward 10 years. And that's without the idea that we actually have two problems in the country. We have a specialist problem, which is that we need more than 400,000 additional specialist IT people. We also have the generalist problem. So of the order of 80% of all job specifications today demand at least one digital skill, and we anticipate that will rise over 90%. So having digital is really going to matter. And I think it's clear to see that when I narrow in on cyber in a second, you will have a similar set of problems. We are not simply producing an insufficient number of people with the right skills. We're producing an insufficient order of magnitude of people with the right skills. So to compare to that 400,000 need, English universities produce between 26 and 28,000 computer science graduates a year. If you have that degree, you really are in demand. So I've talked about the order of magnitude. I've talked about the idea that number is growing rapidly. It's also worth pointing out, and I'll talk a little bit about inclusion as I go through these slides. If it is true, and I think it's usefully incorrect rather than perfect, if it is true that digital adoption leapt forward 7 to 10 years in the pandemic, it is also true that people and businesses and organizations and regions that were slightly behind the curve 3 years ago are now very behind the curve. We have a group of excluded learners and companies who now have to work extremely hard to catch up. And I think in the context of a discussion of cybersecurity, that means that we have a whole set of new naive users who will arrive in your world and will need some kind of help navigating a newly digitalized economy. I'll talk as I go on the complexity of this problem. There are a lot of moving pieces, from the kinds of people we need to attract to the ways in which we attract them, and increasingly the number of destinations to which they aspire. It's not true, it is no longer true and may never have been true, that being interested in digital or being interested in cyber leads you to one job, one career and one pathway. It is true that all of us will need a little bit of it, and those who enter cyber as their primary profession will distribute across a growing number of rather diverse areas. It's also worth pausing. This is, I think, an increasingly large area of interest for national businesses. The future of work, what are we going to be doing? We are going to be working more at home. We are going to be working more remotely. It's also true that we're going to be working more increasingly in portfolio careers. I don't know how many people here have followed the implicit model of education in this country, which is you're born, you learn, you work, you die. I'm not sure that that's a viable model, and it is not one that I intend to follow myself. I offer it for criticism, not because anybody has actually written a paper talking about the birth, learning, working, dying model. I think it's also worth talking about this multilingualism, and I don't mean that in the traditional sense. I think that's also an interesting topic, but it is equally true if you talk to companies like Google X, the people that look at the moonshot bets for Google. They are increasingly convinced that the next 5 years will be one in which the application of AI and of big data and of cyber across the economy is the interesting challenge. So we will, of course, as universities, continue to develop those areas. But when we look at what AI means in agriculture, or what cybersecurity needs to be in education, these are areas becoming particularly prominent. I'm not sure, Kamal, whether I'm allowed to say that a number of universities have suffered cybersecurity attacks in the last year. I think we can. Okay, then a number of universities have suffered cybersecurity attacks in the last year, and that has caused us all to think differently about the way that we conduct our business. It's also true that the future of work is unknown. It's a trite thing to say, but I'll say it anyway. If you'd like to put a number on it, estimations by people like Tech UK, the trade body that looks at the digital industry, they estimate that 40% of the jobs that will exist in 2035 don't exist now. And so when we talk about solutions to this large and growing gap in digital skills and a corresponding gap in cyber skills, we're talking about producing people with those talents against a rather shifting and rather uncertain background. Can I just check, am I talking at about the right pace? If there's anybody that would like me just to get on with it, I can whip through these slides in under a minute. If you could raise your hand now if that's true. Okay, are you just waiting for the slide that says government policy? Is that where we're going with it? I can live with that. So let's get to cybersecurity specifically. I don't want to talk just about digital. So the World Economic Forum in March of this year estimated that we need 2.65 million additional specialists in cybersecurity. Now, to give that a little bit more perspective, that's the equivalent of everybody who works in IT in the UK stopping what they're doing and shifting to cybersecurity. In addition, we would also need all the people that work in IT-related roles outside the IT sector also to shift, and we'd still be left about 300,000 to 400,000 people short. So 2.65 million is a large number. It doesn't seem like a large number as an international need, but it represents something like a 65% growth in the sector. And those are only the specialists. I'd like to go back to this idea that we have two problems, a specialist problem and a problem for the rest of us. It's also true that if we're going to stop things like cyber attacks on universities, we need people working in registry and people working in finance and people putting courses online to know enough to be able to work with the specialists. So there's a huge, huge demand for people with these kinds of skills. It's also true, I wanted to come back to the idea also in cyber particularly, the idea that people end up in a diverse range of destinations. The UK Cyber Security Council also said early this year that they recognise 16 separate career pathways. So it is no longer true that cybersecurity is one thing. And I think the people in this room will understand that better than I do. But when we're talking about training, we need to talk about scale, we need to talk about pace, but we also need to talk about flexibility of destination. We can no longer train to one common core and assume that that will be enough nationally. It's also true that there are challenges in diversity and inclusion around cyber. And interestingly, these reflect, these are somewhat close to the parallel statistics in the wider digital world. So number of people in cyber who identify as female, 15%. About 16% of our undergraduate computer scientists in this country identify as women. Interestingly, the digital sector workforce is a slightly larger number, but clearly I don't know how we end up with anything other than 50% as our target for gender balance in cyber. But it is absolutely clear that we are not taking advantage of all the talent that exists in the country when facing a really yawning gap of skills. Also interesting to note that cyber is a slightly more positive area in terms of employment of ethnic minorities and employment of the neurodivergent than many other sectors in the country, until you realise that cyber sits on a boundary between an area with a very, very poor inclusion record, which is computer science, and a discipline that has a much stronger inclusion record, which is mathematics. So I'm not going to talk about the social end of cyber, which is a separate conversation, but it is certainly true that we turn 40% of maths undergraduates in this country into 15% reaching the cybersecurity workforce. There is something going wrong as we pass through advanced education. I'd be interested to hear your views on what that is and where it is, but I think we recognise from the numbers that something is going awry. So in terms of stakeholder needs, it's also worth recognising that different parts of this equation generate different needs. So we have a national need. There is no problem. This can be your first national problem. If you're studying cyber, you are part of the solution to a national problem. If you look organisationally, so you look at individual companies and organisations that look like companies, again, I'd refer you back to this idea that there are two problems. There's the specialist problem, not enough of those, and there's the generalist problem, and there aren't nearly enough of those. Personally, however, and it's true for me, it's true, I think, for most people in the room, what we're really interested in is a rewarding and meaningful career. And I will touch briefly on the idea that anybody that wants to be a ballet dancer shouldn't, because cyber is better for them. I would, briefly and indeed from a huge distance, I know the guy that ran that campaign and I have some sympathy for him. I would point out that our ambition here is not to have people come and worship the great god of tech. Our ambition here is to make sure that people with their own objectives have enough cybersecurity to do what they want to do. And if cybersecurity is what you want to do, great, then come and learn it as a specialist. If you want to be a ballet dancer or you want to be an engineer or a lawyer or a doctor, it is very likely that you're going to need some. And then we get into a conversation which Kamal and I have had on numerous occasions about what represents some. And I think the answer is we don't really know. Maybe Kamal will talk about that in his closing remarks, but I certainly don't know. Here it is. Government policy as of the morning of the 7th of July 2022. The old government policy really has a number of facets. The two I want to pick out are an increased focus on lifelong learning and an increased focus on short courses. And that has benefits in a number of directions. Clearly, the industry demand is for shorter courses that produce people that are work ready quicker. We have a huge amount of pushback at the Institute of Coding around the idea that the universities involved take a year to design a course, take a year to certify a course, 3 years to teach it, and only at that point can we produce people with new skills. That is not what industry is asking for. It's also true that lifelong learning has benefit for learners. Again, I'd refer you back to my now patented Rachid's model, born, learn, work, die. If you'd like to do anything other than that, it seems sensible to think about the ways that you're going to gather skills as you go. And I think for those of you in the room who are still studying, working out what you do beyond the end of a large course is really exciting. Because I was in conversation last week. I have a number of qualifications in computer science, including a doctorate. My doctorate is, let's kindly describe it as more than 10 years old. It is therefore interesting to know, outside my very specialist area, how relevant I personally am to an employer with skills that are more than 10 years out of date. And therefore the challenge for me, and the challenge in turn for all of you, will be how do I keep my skills current? How do I maintain an ability to function at the cutting edge of really interesting industries, whether they be IT specific, cyber specific, or something else? It's also true, I've talked a little bit to this slide, but it's also true that kind of short modular approach can have benefit to educators. And I'm really interested in the great ships of state in the national education system. It is true that there are a growing number of private companies providing this kind of service, and I salute them for it. There is no problem with them doing that. If we are going to achieve the kind of scale that we need nationally, we must move public education also. If there are any vice chancellors in the room, I mean that with love. I don't have any poor intent towards universities. I work for one. I think they matter, but I think it matters that we change. It is clearly true that if we have a series of short courses, that affords us advantages in terms of changing quickly, that affords us advantages in terms of combining short courses together to create new and interesting pathways, and it affords us an opportunity to allow people to have experience beyond our walls that we can take account of. At Bath, we have, I think there's no indiscretion here, we have somebody on our computer science master, on our AI masters, I apologise, who has been a programmer at Microsoft for 10 years, and he is currently taking my introduction to programming course. That is not a useful way to proceed, but it's the only way we can certify him with a master's degree. So we need to change some of this stuff. It's also worth talking about the fact, and this is increasingly our conversation, I'd again be interested in views from the floor. When I talk about employer need, I don't talk about a single need there either. So we have a huge amount of focus in first case recruitment. Very hard to recruit people, very hard to upskill people in your organisation that have had the right skills but need them refreshed. Very hard to have people that have done other things for your company. I've had a number of conversations with a large bank that I shan't name, but it rhymes with JP Morgan. And they talk to me about the idea that what they're really after are computer scientists with soft skills, and it would appear that there are two categories of approach. The first is to take computer scientists and beat them until they're soft, and that one is moderately unsuccessful. The other way is to take people with all of the corporate culture and all of the cultural skills and all of the industry-specific skills and teach them some digital. So I think that idea of cross-training is a really relevant one in the context that the country is digitalising rapidly. It's also true that we have to be interested in redundancy or exit points from organisations and industries. The Army are very interested in this. What do you do when you stop being an active soldier? What do you do in Swindon when the Honda plant shuts down? Because the current response by public education is, we don't know. There must be some ability on all our parts to do rather more than local reactions. If there is a large shift in the local economy, we need to have a plan for getting people back on track and back into meaningful and purposeful work. So I think that idea of training for redundancy or cross-training at a point of redundancy is one that we need to look at increasingly. The point of all of these is that they are different problems that require different solutions. It's not enough to say just more master's degrees in cyber then. We need to work out how to serve learners with need at all of those points. I'll skip briefly through these, but I think there's a great deal of detail here. We know that once we focus on short courses, that there are opportunities to teach people before a big course. So for people that think they might want to go and learn cyber but don't know yet, doing a little bit of cyber is a really good way to demonstrate that. And again, the IOC has partners across the country. Gloucestershire is one of them. So we work very closely with the team here, or rather they work very closely with us. They work and we shout. But having these short courses as gateways into a more formal piece of education is a very interesting pathway. The hardest one, and the one that the government is most focused on, is having long courses broken down into short courses. So instead of taking a degree, you take a series of modules and they will add up to a degree. I think we're quite a long way away from that, but that's an interesting point. After long courses, back to the point, if you have a master's degree and it's more than 5 years old, you might want to look very carefully at how relevant you are in the employment world at this point. I apologise if I've offended anybody personally in the room, that includes me. And clearly there are people that want a short course instead of a long course. So we've been involved in delivering boot camps as a group of universities across the country. It is really interesting that we see two groups of people using those boot camps to redirect their careers. We see people starting out in their working life, and we see people who've done something else who are cross-training. And that's great. We are learning how to serve those two groups, but I think we know that probably means that those courses are being overloaded. It's unlikely that we are providing adequate service to two groups of people with very different need, and therefore we need to work out a little more closely, I think, how to serve one and how to serve the other separately. We've been involved in prominent pilots, so we've taught a large number of online courses. The gaudy numbers from the Institute of Coding come from the online short courses, many of which were spotlighted by the government in the middle of the pandemic. We've run boot camps, which are smaller, more personal, more immediate upskilling opportunities to get into a new industry. And we've run community specific. For those of you that are really interested in inclusion and the ways that education can serve it, if you've not seen the Tech Up Women course that was run out of Durham University, I'd suggest you go and look at it. The mechanisms around that were really interesting. Our experience doing these things, so the partnership that is the Institute of Coding, our experience in being involved in these things is that we do get new learners. You can attract different people. So when we look at the gender imbalance, for example, that I showed on the slide from DCMS earlier, on the Tech Up community specific course, we had 100% women. And even on our online courses where the targeting was less specific, we had between 46 and 47% women participating in those courses. So again, it seems a little trite to say, but it is clearly true that if you change the structure of the way that you deliver education, you get different people coming. And that's so obvious that it barely needs saying, but we can demonstrate that with empirical evidence. It's worth saying, however, that the current government drive towards short courses fulfills some of the need, but not all of it. I think I talked earlier about the idea that short courses can be stacked into something greater. You may need 2 modules, you may need 3, you may need 1. It's not clear again that there's one size that fits all. Currently, none of the provision that we've been sponsored to provide by the government is stackable. It's not clear how you do 2 boot camps or 2 online courses or 2 community focused courses. So limitations, one size fits all, it clearly doesn't. And we are seeing, I gave my first talk a month ago about how boot camps weren't for everybody after a couple of years of talking about how degrees weren't for everybody. I think degrees serve a really clear purpose for some people. I think that boot camps serve a really clear purpose for some people. That drive towards tailoring and personalisation, I think, is one that we all need to worry about. It's not clear that all of the outcomes of our new short courses are as inclusive as we'd like them to be. So with the first round of data that we have from the government-sponsored boot camps, we know that if you're a man completing one of those courses, you are more likely to find employment than if you're a woman taking one of those courses, as a percentage of the cohort. And I have to tell you that we work pretty hard to have that not be true. So that represents a failure for us. We are looking with expert community groups at why that might be true. We think that there are a couple of issues. The first is that if we attract people into education that need flexibility around education, have caring responsibilities, have non-professional responsibilities, if we provide flexible education and the jobs waiting at the end are not flexible, of course we lose people between the educational pathway and the workplace. So that's certainly a thing, and we have feedback from learners to talk about that. We think there's a more subtle issue around confidence. It's a reasonably well-reported statistic that if a group of women and a group of men see the same job advert, if the group of men are missing one of the skills, they think they can do the rest and apply. I know that's true for me. If a group of women on average look at the same job advert and see that they are missing one skill, it is more likely to be true that they think they're not capable of doing the job and stop. And that is something that we absolutely need to reverse. It's no more true for one group than for the other, but it is a perception which persists. It's also true that these things need to be coherent. And I was having a conversation at lunchtime about the idea that it's all very well doing boot camps over here and degrees over there and master degrees down here and degree apprenticeships over there. It's not clear how one would join them up. If I am a learner entering the foreign country that is public education, it's not clear how I would take participation on a cybersecurity boot camp and turn it into participation in a degree apprenticeship with a job at the end of it. And I don't know if that's something that you have more information on, but I don't think we do a very good job joining up these different pieces of the educational landscape. So we've also got to worry about how much we're trying to change. It's reasonably easy to change the way that we do teaching, but if we're going to change the way that we do teaching, we also need to think about the way that we give work experience, the way that we deliver signposting, the way that we interface between one course and the other. And I'll come back to the plumbing piece in a second, but it is really, really interesting. If anybody knows how to crack this, please stop me on the way out. If you know how to take people from a short online course, which is accessible and available in the evenings and all good things, if you know how to get those people to work experience in a coherent and national scale way, that would be your second national problem to solve today. So once you've become a cybersecurity specialist, if you can solve work experience at the back end of online courses, you really would have done your country a service. In terms of plumbing, again, I think I'm probably not supposed to say this, but let me say it and deny that I ever said it afterwards. It is true for most large public educators that we don't have the plumbing to deliver these courses at much larger scale than we're currently doing. Our registry systems don't work for short courses. Our finance systems don't work for short courses. Our student support is not geared up for short courses, and so on and so on and so on. The point here is not the specific problems, but rather that if we change one piece of the pathway to get people to the job that they want, we need to change all the other pieces as well, and that's something we're grappling with at the moment. So what do? The answer that we have is that we work collaboratively. I think the answer must be that none of us have the entire answer to this problem, and I don't think that our friends in Cheltenham down the road have the whole answer. I don't think that the university in which we're sitting has the whole answer. I don't think my university has the whole answer. But it may be true that each of us has a piece of the solution, and working together we can get to a better solution more quickly. That's true around engagement. I've talked about, don't be a ballet dancer, be a cybersecurity expert. I think there are better ways to engage people than that, particularly ballet dancers. How we design courses, it's also true that tends to be a little bit siloed. We need to change that. Clearly the way that we deliver. And I know that Kamal and team have worked very hard on getting industry experts into these courses and making sure that you're really hearing from people that employ. Clearly pathways to work. There is a specific problem here, and again, I think it's a problem of the moment rather than a long-lasting, cannot-be-solved problem. It is true that we know and employers know generally where to find people finishing degrees and where to find people finishing master's courses and even where to find people finishing doctorates. It's not clear that the same structural off-ramp exists from these short courses into employment. And I don't mean that nobody's finding jobs. People are finding jobs at a surprisingly high rate. What is not true is that there is a structural solution nationwide that allows us to say, you finished your boot camp, you finished your online course, you finished your community course, go here and the employers are waiting for you. Again, something that we need to fix collaboratively. Also true that if you are a non-standard student in any course, in a private course, in a public course, in a course that you've curated yourself, you are likely to need different forms of support than the people that are in a different kind of course. So we're still working out how to support people going through this as well as we can. So let me finish with this. I think there's something for us all to do here. Clearly, nationally, we need to make sure that these things are promoted. Hopefully there will be a government in place again this evening that will allow us to drive on with this stuff. I have a fairly bad record of talking about ministers and them getting sacked. I have no particular insight into why that happens, but this is actually my third occasion saying, and I talked to the minister and a hand has gone up and someone said, they just got sacked. So let me not name anybody by name unless they really offend me. Regionally, there is an awful lot of work, and I think this facility represents one of those initiatives. There's an awful lot of work to make sure that we serve regional need in the whole levelling up agenda, which may not be an agenda as of 11 o'clock this morning. Clearly, we need to work with companies to make this work, but I think more than anything, I would encourage you, whether you are starting out, whether you are longer in the tooth as I am, to think about how you are going to break that idea of birth, learn, work, die. You are going to have to learn throughout your life. You're going to have to find sensible places to do that learning, and you are going to have to continue gathering skills that possibly didn't exist when you did your large piece of education. So with that, thank you all for listening. I think I'm pretty much on time, and if I may, I will stop and ask for questions. I see a question here and then a question there, if that's okay.
Thanks for that. It's amazing the breadth of it, and I've got about 300 questions, but I'm going to stick with.
Could you pick an easy one?
How old are you? No.
Very.
I'm really intrigued by your comment about spinning up courses in a responsive
Yes.
way. I guess the big question is, how do you do that and maintain quality?
So it's a good question. I think the answer is that there's a minimum speed that we could probably write a course overnight and not put it through QA, and it would be of the quality that you'd expect. So I think some checking. I think the deeper question is what checking is relevant for short courses. We know pretty well what checking is relevant for full degrees and the different people that need to sign off and so on. So I think I talked to Tech UK about how accreditation now works. Who should do accreditation if we have thousands of short courses rather than a national body doing it if we have 196 universities producing a small number of degree courses? How do you do the internal QA to make sure that the course itself fits the need? And I think the answer is probably in the modularity, that if we make small enough, we can tailor by combining different pieces rather than tailoring by having every single responsive course be different. And that's still a response that depends on there being a national education system that serves differently. But I would share with you two conversations that I had when we first learned that we had the money for the Institute of Coding, both with large tech companies, one of whom, I'll name neither of them, but one of them rhymes with Google and one of them rhymes with Microsoft. And the people at the company that I'm going to refer for ease of use to as Microsoft said that the only thing you need to do is teach people the tools that they will actually use in their workplace today. And the people at the company I'm going to subtly refer to as Google said the only thing you must not do is teach people tools, teach them fundamental principles, and we'd like to teach them the tools of the day. So I suspect the answer is in the modularization, that we can teach fundamental principles. We can or cannot add a tool-specific piece on top of it, but if it's all lumped together in one monolithic whole, we don't serve anybody. Is that some part of an answer to your question, or did I miss it?
It is, but that leads me on to the stackable bit.
Yeah.
Designing a modular system is difficult, but what you've just said is essentially we need to teach resilience,
Yes.
confidence before anything else.
So I think it is certainly true that technical only is not the answer to modularization. We see that through the boot camp, through the online courses, through the community-centered courses, that there are many courses that teach you Java. There are a few that teach you Java in a realistic environment, plus the professional skills to allow you to get the job that allows you to use Java. So I think the combination of them all. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry.
Hi. My question is more about sort of lifelong learning.
Yes.
So, should lifelong learning, should the responsibility for that rest with the individual or with the organisation? And if it's with the individual, who should pay for it?
Not me. So
Should organisations be, or governments be creating
Sure.
funding for that, or should the individual put their hand in their pocket?
I suspect I'm about to perform the academic trick of changing the question and answering the one that I wish you'd asked. If I haven't got close enough to yours at the end, would you correct me? Is that all right, please? In a more tailored educational world, it seems sensible to me that for some people, self-curated pathways are appropriate. And we see that, for example, in the large MOOC generation of MOOCs that precedes this one, so the MOOCs that are 5 and 10 years old. If you have a degree, you are far more likely to complete it and far more likely to succeed on it than if you don't. And that probably means that if you know how to learn, you know how to fix a problem when you get stuck, at which point for you, self-curation is great. Why add the extra weight on top? It is equally true for people that don't have that ability to self-curate that we need to provide them something more guided. And so I think part of the answer to the previous question is you could imagine in a modular world, companies saying we will accept anything certified this way and we need you to have these 3 to succeed. But I think that the answer is some of each. I suspect that the people doing the curating need to change. I don't think that it's possible that it's only the educator or only accreditor that is able to curate. My suspicion is that we'll see a system a little bit like we've seen in home PCs, where frameworks of acceptance exist which allow you to know that if you do this combination of things, you can work in this cluster of companies. I don't believe that there is a single answer that it must only be this or it must only be that. My moral position on education is that it's a public good and the public should pay for it. I'm absolutely happy to believe that there are people, probably including myself, who are now able to pay for my own education and I should contribute. But I think morally education is a public service. That's where I stand.
Something like the Cybersecurity Council pathways.
Yes.
People can look at where they want to go and what skills they need for those different
Yes.
roles would help with the curation.
I think so. Being able to, so the Cybersecurity Council, I think, is a really good example that they are credible and trustworthy to some extent, and therefore them saying to you to reach this career, have this combination of things, probably guides people as they enter the foreign country of starting a new career. Yeah, I think so.
And the Levelling Up Minister has been appointed.
Fantastic. Should I mention them so that they're no longer in post tomorrow?
It's Greg Clark.
Fantastic. Congratulations to Greg Clark. Thank you. Hi.
Hi, I don't know if you know this, but I'm just wondering, with COVID, has it affected your online and distance learning take-up? And when students do online and distance learning, do you think it teaches all the relevant employability skills as they would get through a university face-to-face education?
I've learnt to fear questions that start with "you may not know the answer to this," because guess what? I don't. In multiple pieces, we're pretty sure that the pandemic caused more people to do home learning for reasons of opportunity and reasons of ambition and a series of other reasons. So we know from the online courses that we coincidentally launched 2 months before lockdown and others that we launched 2 months after lockdown, that there was a difference in take-up. It's not a terribly robust study in the sense that we had 2 of one and 6 of the other, and that doesn't really give you enough evidence, but we suspect that the answer is yes. What's interesting is that we've not seen an enormous drop-off afterwards, so it may be that shift endures. So to the do people behave differently piece, yes, I think they do, and I think they will continue to. To the employability piece, no. And I think, so teaching professional skills, putting an online course that tells you how to write a CV or how to conduct an interview, you can find those. Those are easy enough and we can point you towards them and that's great. The real issue is with application and practice. So it's not clear how one does what I would call work experience. And I don't mean it in the narrow sense of a placement year. I mean it in the wider sense of taking what you've done and applying it in a place. The online work experience programs that we know of are terribly, terribly small. And I mean single-digit people, not the millions of people that we need to employ. So I think there's a real challenge there. And there are some interesting questions about whether we can do some kind of filtering such that recruiters become interesting and want to help people through into jobs. It is true, for example, that the people that own FutureLearn, which is the largest of the UK online platforms, FutureLearn just sold 50% of itself to a recruitment agency. So it would appear that there are people circling around that space who may or may not have good intention. But as of right now, the answer is no, we don't know how to do that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no,
Great. Thank you. Yes.
Could I ask that the questions, they introduce themselves?
Yes, please. Yes, absolutely.
And if we need the speaker for the back, I'm happy to take the mic to the back.
So, yes. Hi.
Hi, my name is Abu, and I'm from University of Gloucestershire.
Hey, Abu.
So, hi. So my question is: so you mentioned that there are shortages in the sector, in the digital sector, and there are a million people needed in the sector. So my question is, why some of our graduates still don't get a job in this sector, even there is so much need in this area? Is it because of that course? Do you have any data across the UK that how many people don't get it, how many graduates don't get a job from their course? So what is the main problem here? So is it the student, or is it the course, or is it the university, or any other skill they need to get the job? So any sort of data you need to share?
So I absolutely do not have an answer for individual people or individual institutions. I can offer you some context that may help to explain it. It was true in 2018 that computer science graduates had the highest rate of unemployment of graduates from any discipline in England. I have colleagues who tell me that if you disregard the outliers, that we become middle of the pack, and I have a problem with that on two bases. First of all, that's not how you do statistics, and second of all, that's not a useful ambition for us. Somewhere in the middle of the pack in the hottest area in the national economy doesn't seem right to me. So it is a national problem that some of the training we're doing is missing. I think the clue to why it's happening lies in the surveys that employers conduct about the skills that they're looking for. And if you ask tech employers what they're looking for, the technical skills piece comes 5th or 6th in that list, and above that lies creativity, problem solving, ability to collaborate, resilience, and so on. So I think the answer may be that we're teaching people the technical part of the role, but not the surrounding parts of the role that make them employable immediately. It's interesting that 3 years down the line, our employment rate as a sector is pretty good, which suggests that once people have added those additional pieces, things go much better for them. But I suspect it's in that blend of skills rather than in the way that we teach technically. I don't know that that's a terribly specific answer, but is that a beginning of an answer? Thank you. Hi, at the back. Yes, please. I'm sorry, bear with me.
Can you take the mic? Just a minute, please.
I'm so sorry, I won't be able to hear your question, and then I'll end up talking about what I wanted to anyway, which is no use in a Q&A session. Bear with us. Hi, I can hear you now, thank you.
My question is in continuation to Abu's question.
Yes.
That a person, when they go out, most of the industry, they ask for the knowledge in tools.
Yes.
As per your discussion that you said that the companies want that you should learn the basics and the rest of the things will be teaching you.
Yes.
Will train you. But in actual, when they go for a course, actually the opposite thing happens.
Yes.
Because the expectation is
Yes. We see that fraying as an outcome. I am sure that for individual learners and individual courses and individual companies, that's still true. We see an increasing push by large companies, whether big tech companies or big professional services companies, the idea that someone that's demonstrated motivation and ability to learn something will be employed. So the idea that companies are going to be able to employ the perfect person every time is rather challenged by the starting salaries at AWS. So if you are paying £140,000 to a newly minted graduate, you can choose whichever graduate you like. If you are not paying £140,000 starting salary to a newly minted graduate, you may have to look at other ways to find employment. I would also point out that AWS have never called me and offered me £140,000. So there's something about my own educational pathway that I now regret. But I think that's an issue. I think that my answer is around the surrounding skills, and we need different blends. But I'm very sure that as a trend is changing, that the idea of perfection or nothing is diminishing as a reason for not hiring people. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very much, Rachid.
Thanks, everybody.
Just before you go, we would just like to present you with a little gift because it was such a good talk.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you very much. Thank you also for the questions. If I could finish by asking Kamal not to tell my Vice-Chancellor that I criticised any university at any point. Thank you all.